This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert.
In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's the official meaning of Christmas. St. Paul in the Epistle today adds that to that and fills it out a little bit more. But before faith came, that is, before Christ, we were under the law. We were like slaves, obeying the law. We were either on the naughty list or the nice list, but we were not children. We were not heirs. But now that faith has come, it's a whole new ballgame. And by adoption, we become now persons, children of God, capable of relationship and salvation. And so it is that it had to become personal. Those of you and others who know me a little bit are probably aware that I'm not one of those people who has a good relationship with computers and emails. I'm very inadequate. I'm close to Ludditism. And that is true that I really don't like email. However, I don't think it's all bad. It is amazing to me that you can write a letter to someone on the other side of the globe and push a button and in an instant it's there with relatively no cost. It amazes me that you can send out the information about a meeting or an agenda or an item or a date to hundreds and thousands of people at a time with one punch. An email blast gets there and everybody knows. Very practical. They're great for information. But when it comes to communication, email flunks. We know from social sciences and psychological processes and the way people work that, the percentages could be argued with, but 50% of communication is body language. Maybe another 30% is tone of voice. And when you get through with that, there isn't much left. And that's where emails on that level don't do the job. Now, the Bible, as we call it, in a real sense, all those documents that we read as scriptures, they're really God's emails over long periods of time. Emails from Jeremiah and Isaiah and Genesis and all of that. And in those emails, there's lots of information that's very important that we need to know. Very important. You can't not deal with those emails that we call the Bible. We just got them printed and put them in, structures so you can buy them in a Bible bookstore. And what that information will tell you is that God was trying to express himself, communicate himself down through the ages to heal the ancient wound of that brokenness between us and God. And he tried all kinds of things like law. Moses and Sinai didn't work. All it tells you is whether or not you're on the naughty list or the nice list, but it doesn't tell you how to save yourself from not being lawful. There was the monarchy. Well, if you guys really want a nation like other nations, all right, I'll let you try it. You can have a king too, and it was a disaster. There were the prophets, wonderful emails. Isaiah, Jeremiah, wonderful emails. Lots of great stuff, but didn't change anything. And there was wisdom, the wisdom literature, living the right life. That didn't do it either. It became obvious to God, if we read those emails, that God decided it had to be personal. Only a person can get through and do what needed to be done. Emails don't work. It's got to be like that. You cannot get a hug or communion from a Hewlett-Packard or an Apple. Although, as I said at 8 o'clock, I can imagine the way things are going that within my lifetime, someone will figure out how to produce one with the right USB port that if you put in your name, plug in your parish and your secret Episcopal Church identity code, out will pop a wafer, probably consecrated, just like you get a ticket when you go to a parking structure, right? I suppose that'll happen, but you know what? Even if that does happen, I want you to know that when it comes time for me to take communion, I want to receive communion from Father Andrew, from Victoria or Eric, or Sandra, or Kathy, or Richard, or John, or Susan, or Aaron, or Rick, or George, or whoever's on duty. I want communion from a person, because that's how it works. At least that's how I work. And so it is with God as well. We now, Paul says, are capable of being in relationship to God because God has become a person like us, and now we can deal on that level, no longer as slaves to law. And the notion of adoption is a powerful one. It means you are chosen. It means you are wanted. My own son, Ben, was adopted at 9, and I often told him that he was chosen and that he was wanted. 2 families previous had rejected him. And I can honestly say that those children who are born natural, so to speak, our biological children, I think they're chosen just as well, maybe in a slightly different way. Because even a natural born might not be chosen, and we see those disasters in social worker contexts and in psychiatrist offices where a child, for some reason, because of impediments or pathology, was not chosen, wanted by their natural parents. But adoption is a powerful image that says it's now personal. And indeed, because it is personal, we can react to God as persons and be in relationship. You can't have a relationship with a computer, only with persons. And now it's possible through the healing of relationship that we can move on past slavery in whatever form it takes. Slavery has many faces to it. It's not just what we think of with that word. 100 years ago, this month, in Belgium, on the German-Belgian border, World War I, the shelling suddenly slowed down and stopped on Christmas Eve. And suddenly there were Christmas carols being heard. And the next thing you know, packages were thrown over the no man's land where previously anybody who walked was slaughtered by a machine gun. And on Christmas Day, the British and the German soldiers came out from the trenches, greeted one another, exchanged gifts, smoked cigarettes, played some games. And for a couple of days, light shone in the midst of the darkness. Because for a brief moment, the soldiers of Britain and the soldiers of Germany became persons together in relationship, and there was healing. Of course, then the war had to start up again, right? Makes quite a comment on the stupidity of war, doesn't it? 6,000 a day on average were killed on the Western front lines during World War I. More close to home and more real, the last few months, we have been seeing on the news, one wave after another hitting the beach, of horrible examples of broken relationships between police personnel and African American persons in our culture and in our country. And it's been very bad, and it's been all over the news. And we're talking now again about slavery. Just as in war, the slavery is, I've got to believe that that other person on the other country, the other side, is an enemy and bad, because according to the law, my leaders say so I better kill him. So indeed, there's now another kind of slavery still in our country. It's not plantation stuff. It's the slavery that goes something like this. And I'm a former police chaplain myself. Policemen live in the slavery of believing, often in many cases, in many cities, that when they see a young African American, he must be up to no good. That's a slavery. They also live, and even more so now, under the slavery of believing that if there really is an incident, and they really do need to use force, and it's legit, they still have the slavery of the fear that someone will not understand or believe them to be overreacting or being biased. On the other side of that ledger, young African Americans, and not just young ones, for years and years and years, were under the slavery of knowing that when they saw a police officer or a uniform like that, they were not looking at a friend. Protect and serve had nothing to do with them. And the statistics are there to verify that if you need to look. It's horrifying, the number of incidents based on that kind of notion. And they also live now with a further enslavement, especially more so lately with all these incidents back to back, the fear and the enslavement to their own anger. that bubbles out because of that perception that makes them react often in that way. Both are enslaved. But about a month ago, on the evening news, just for a flash, because good news never lasts long in the news, but someone had taken a picture in Missouri. I'm not sure which department it was, but at a peaceful demonstration, someone had captured a photograph of a young 12-year-old black boy being hugged by a policeman in full uniform. That made the news at least one night. And what had happened, apparently, it was a very quick news, and I'm not sure I remember every little detail, but the 12-year-old boy had been standing there, apparently with a placard or a shirt or a sign, something that said, "Free hugs." And the policeman, who I think was a chief of police somewhere, might not have been a chief, but I think he was, looked at that and said, "I want one of those." And he embraced the young black man. They embraced each other. And that photo actually made the news. And in that moment, the police officer and the young black American were freed from slavery in that moment, because they were able somehow to be persons with each other and enter into relationship. That's where salvation takes place, and it requires flesh, person. I've always loved that story of the little girl who was being tucked into bed one night, scared to death of the dark, and she says to her mother, "I'm really scared of the dark," and mother, who wants to get back to her TV program, says, "Now, honey, God is here. You don't need to be afraid. You can't see him, but he's really here, and you're safe." And the little girl says, "But, Mommy, I want someone with skin on him." It requires skin to be saved. And in that moment in Missouri, the light shone in the midst of darkness. The light that our gospel says today can never be overcome. It can never be overcome in the last analysis. There was freedom that day, at that moment, on that street. Paul would explain all of this, St. Paul, that really the bottom line is we're all adopted. You're not natural born, you're adopted. We're all children of God by God's action of becoming a person. The only native born in this picture is Jesus himself, the Christ, who was in the beginning with God and who was God. He's natural. The rest of us are adopted. And it means that if I'm adopted, that means you're adopted. If it means I'm a child of God, so are you. And even more, those people outside this room who I don't like or I'm in conflict with or are others, they too, whether they know it or not, are also children of God. And if we're all children of the same parent, guess what that makes us? Brothers and sisters. And it is in the possibility of person to person in relationship that it is possible to move out of the darkness of the sin of slavery, and even more the slavery of sin, precisely because the Word, the emails, became flesh and personal. Amen.